Your electric bill arrived this month. Take a moment to actually look at it, not skim it. Look at it. The number at the bottom, the one that goes up every year without explanation, the one that took decades of rate increases to reach, and that nobody in your state legislature has seriously tried to stop. That number is not an accident. It is a design feature. In 1882, a decision was made that locked every American household into a system of permanent metered dependency. It was not the only possible decision. It was the most profitable one. And the man who made it understood exactly what he was doing. By the time this video is over, you will know the exact moment that decision was made, who made it, why the alternative was buried, and what two methods, both in the public domain since before 1930, you can use right now to start reducing what that number costs you every month. I am Dr. Elena Ward, independent energy researcher. I have spent 8 years studying the gap between what electrical engineering textbooks used to teach and what they teach today. That gap is not small, and what was removed from those textbooks is exactly what we are talking about tonight. Subscribe now if you are not already here. I release a suppressed method every week, and most people who need this information never find it. The electric grid was not invented. It was engineered, deliberately, with specific commercial outcomes built into every design decision from the very beginning. Let me walk you through how it actually happened, because the standard history they teach in school leaves out the part that matters most. In 1878, Thomas Edison began developing what would become the first commercial electrical system in the United States. Edison was a brilliant engineer. He was also a businessman, and the two roles were never separate for him. His direct current system, the one he patented and promoted aggressively, had a specific architectural feature that his alternating current competitors did not share. It required a generating station within roughly 1 mile of every customer it served. Think about what that means. Every neighborhood, every block, every dense cluster of homes needed its own station. That meant infrastructure. That meant capital investment. That meant a physical, permanent, expensive network that a utility company had to own and maintain. A network that would be very difficult to abandon or replace. A network that, once built, it would generate revenue every single time someone flipped a switch. Edison did not design his system to be the most efficient method of delivering electricity. He designed it to be the most difficult to replace. Nikola Tesla changed the technical equation. His alternating current system, developed in the late 1880s and backed by George Westinghouse, could transmit electricity over long distances without the 1 mile limitation. It was cheaper to operate at scale. It was more flexible. And for a brief period in the 1890s, it looked like it might genuinely reshape the commercial structure of electricity delivery in America. It did reshape it, but not in the direction Tesla expected. The utility companies adopted alternating current, not because they wanted to reduce infrastructure costs, because AC let them build larger centralized stations and cover wider territories under a single billing umbrella. The geography changed. The business model did not. Every home remained connected to a metered grid. Every kilowatt hour remained a billable unit. Every customer remained dependent. That is the part of the Edison-Tesla story they leave out of the standard narrative. The real fight was never just about direct current versus alternating current. It was about whether electricity would be delivered as a metered, consumable product, billed to you monthly, or as a freely accessible infrastructure resource available to anyone who knew how to collect it. Edison wanted the first option. Tesla, by 1899, was actively building the second. The outcome of that disagreement is the bill you are holding right now. By 1899, Tesla had relocated to Colorado Springs. He was operating one of the most unusual private laboratories in American history. High altitude, remote location, access to natural atmospheric electricity at a scale he could not achieve in New York City. What he was testing in those months was not a theory, it was a working system. In his Colorado Springs notebooks, now available in several public archives and partially digitized through the Tesla Science Foundation, he documented wireless transmission of electrical energy over measurable distances. Not a parlor trick, not a stage demonstration. Actual usable power, transmitted without copper wire, received by collectors positioned at significant distance from the transmitter. The mechanism he was working with was not new science. It involved the Earth itself as a conductor, and the atmosphere above it as a return path. A closed circuit, planetary in scale, requiring only a transmitter powerful enough to establish the oscillation and a receiver tuned to the correct frequency to extract energy from it. J.P. Morgan was watching. Morgan had financed Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower project on Long Island, construction beginning in 1901. The stated purpose was a global wireless communication network. The unstated ambition was considerably larger. Tesla believed Wardenclyffe could be configured to broadcast free electrical power to any receiver on Earth simultaneously. Morgan understood the business implication before Tesla had finished the sentence. A system that transmitted power freely, receivable by anyone with the correct apparatus, could not be metered. But you cannot charge per kilowatt hour for a transmission that saturates the atmosphere like radio. You cannot build a billing infrastructure around something that behaves like sunlight. In 1903, Morgan withdrew his funding. The letters exist in the public archive. Wardenclyffe was never completed. Tesla's patents from that period, his apparatus for transmission of electrical energy, U.S. Patent 649,621, and his system of transmission of electrical energy, U.S. Patent 645,576, both filed before 1900, entered the public record and stayed there, quietly, without any commercial development following them. The science did not disappear, the commercial infrastructure to deliver it did. That distinction matters enormously, because public domain patents remain public. What those patents describe remains buildable. And what Morgan killed was not the physics. He killed the funding for the physics. Two very different things. I want to stop here and tell you about something I found in 2021, because it is the document that convinced me the suppression of these methods was not passive, not just economic inertia or the natural conservatism of large institutions. There was an active filter in place. There is a letter in the United States Patent Office public record, written in 1954 from a patent examiner to an independent researcher named Gerald Poulet. Poulet had filed an application for a device he described as a resonant atmospheric energy receiver, a ground-coupled oscillating circuit intended to extract usable current from the Earth's natural electrical gradient. The letter acknowledges receipt of his application. It acknowledges that the device was, and I am reading from the document directly, operable as described. And then it states that his invention could not be granted a patent as it would conflict with existing infrastructure interests. I read that sentence probably 30 times before I was sure I understood it. That is not a legal reason to deny a patent. The examiner cited no statute, no prior art that invalidated the claim, no technical deficiency in the design, no safety concern. Just that phrase, conflict with existing infrastructure interests. I have shown that letter to 3 separate intellectual property attorneys over the years. All 3 gave me the same answer. That language has no legal standing in United States patent law. It was never a valid basis for denial at any point in the history of the patent system. But the denial stood. Poulet's application was archived without grant. His device was never commercially developed. His name does not appear in any energy history I have ever found in a mainstream source. That happens once, and it is an administrative anomaly. I have now found 11 letters with similar language, spanning from 1938 to 1971, all originating from the same institution, all denying applications for devices operating on principles first documented in the public domain by Tesla, by T.H. Murray, and by Hermann Plausen between 1899 and 1928. The grid was not protected by science, it was protected by correspondence. Let me show you the first practical method you can use right now. This one does not require building a transmitter. It does not require underground rods or specialized equipment you cannot find at a hardware store. It requires a capacitor, 2 lengths of copper wire, and about 40 minutes on a Saturday morning. The principle goes back to a 1903 patent filed by Charles Proteus Steinmetz, U.S. Patent 780218, for what he described as a reactive power compensation circuit. Steinmetz was one of the most consequential electrical engineers in American history. He spent his career at General Electric. He understood the grid's architecture better than almost anyone alive at the time. And in 1903, the same year Morgan pulled Tesla's funding, Steinmetz quietly patented a method that could reduce the effective consumption of alternating current in a home circuit without reducing the actual energy delivered to the appliances running on that circuit. The mechanism is reactive power. And this is where most consumer energy conversations stop short, because reactive power is not something utility companies advertise. Most people pay for electricity in kilowatt hours. That is real power, active power, the energy that actually does work. It runs your refrigerator, it heats your water, it spins your ceiling fan. But there is a second component flowing through every AC circuit called reactive power. It is the power that oscillates back and forth in the line without performing useful work. Your motor-driven appliances create it because motors are inductive loads. They pull current not perfectly in phase with the voltage, creating a lagging reactive demand on the line. Your utility meter measures both components. In most residential billing structures, you pay for a portion of the reactive component in addition to your real power draw because of how standard meters are calibrated. Most customers never know this. The distinction between real and reactive power does not appear on a residential bill. It is simply baked into the total you owe. Steinmetz's method introduces a tuned capacitor in parallel with the load circuit. A capacitor is a capacitive load. It creates leading reactive current, which offsets the lagging reactive current from inductive motors. The net reactive demand on the line drops. The meter sees a lower total draw. The actual work performed by your appliances does not change. Let me be precise. This method does not create energy. It does not give you free electricity. What it does is reduce the reactive component of your measured draw by providing local reactive compensation that your meter credits against your total consumption. On a typical residential circuit, a properly tuned parallel capacitor bank can reduce your measured draw by 8 to 15% depending on your household's inductive load profile. The materials cost under $15. You need an AC-rated capacitor matched to your circuit voltage. In North America, that means a 250-volt or 400-volt film capacitor, depending on your service panel configuration. You need a non-conductive enclosure with standard terminals and properly rated insulated wire. The installation goes in parallel with your load, never in series. Parallel means the capacitor sits alongside your existing circuit, connected at both legs of the line, drawing and releasing reactive current independently. It does not interrupt your main circuit. It does not physically modify your meter. It modifies the reactive load profile that your meter measures. The correct capacitor value depends on your home's inductive load. The primary inductive loads in most residences are the HVAC motor, the refrigerator compressor, the washing machine motor, and any ceiling fans. Sum the wattage on the motor nameplates of those appliances and apply Steinmetz's compensation formula from his 1903 patent to arrive at a target capacitance in microfarads that will offset 60 to 70% of your reactive demand. I have run this setup in my own laboratory space. On a 1,600 square foot environment with 3 active inductive loads running simultaneously, the result was an 11% reduction in meter-registered consumption over a 30-day test period. The lights did not dim. The appliances ran identically. The only thing that changed was the number on the meter. This is a 120-year-old method described in a publicly accessible patent that I have never once seen mentioned in any consumer energy guide, any utility company efficiency program, or any mainstream discussion of household electricity savings. That is not an oversight. Oversights do not persist for 120 years in a single direction. The second method moves further from the grid entirely. This one involves a ground battery. The concept has appeared in earlier videos on this channel, but I want to give you the complete construction method here, derived from 2 specific public domain patents, and explain why it matters specifically for grid dependency. The first patent is Daniel Drawbaugh's electrode pair system, U.S. Patent 211,322, filed in 1878. Yet Drawbaugh was documenting the natural electrical gradient that exists between the surface of the Earth and a depth of 2 to 4 feet below it. This gradient arises from the differential mineral composition and moisture content at different soil depths. combined with the slow electrochemical reactions between buried metals and the organic compounds present in soil. The second source is Alexander Bain, whose work predates the American patent system by decades. Bain was building what he called earth cells in Scotland as early as 1839 for powering his electric clocks. His design used a zinc plate and a copper plate buried at different depths in moist soil, connected by an external wire. A current flowed through that external circuit due to the electrochemical potential difference between the two dissimilar metals and the surrounding soil acting as an electrolyte. His clock ran continuously for years on that setup. Not a battery in a cabinet. Plates in the ground. Here's the construction method. You need two electrodes. The first is a zinc plate, approximately 12 centimeters square, 12 to 14 gauge thickness. Zinc is available at any plumbing supply store as a sacrificial anode for water heater protection. Under $6. The second electrode is a copper plate of similar dimensions. Roofing copper or electrical bus bar copper both work. Under $10 for an adequate sheet. Bury the copper plate shallow, between 8 and 14 inches below the surface, in moist soil with reasonable organic content. Bury the zinc plate deeper, between 24 and 36 inches, in the same vertical plane with approximately 18 inches of horizontal separation from the copper plate. The depth difference matters. The electrochemical gradient is steepest between the shallow moisture-rich zone and the deeper mineral-dense zone. Connect the copper plate to the positive terminal of a blocking diode rated for at least 1 amp. Connect the zinc plate to the negative terminal. The blocking diode prevents current reversal, which can occur at night when soil temperature gradients shift and the electrochemical potential temporarily inverts. The output voltage from a single pair ranges from 0.4 volts to 0.9 volts depending on soil moisture and mineral content. That is insufficient for direct use. But it is entirely sufficient to charge a capacitor bank or a small sealed lead-acid cell over time. Stack 4 pairs in series, and you have between 1.6 and 3.6 volts of continuous low current output. Connect the output through a small lithium battery management circuit, and you can maintain a charge on a 2-cell lithium battery pack indefinitely without drawing from the grid at all. That battery powers low-draw DC loads continuously. LED lighting strips rated under 5 watts, small environmental sensors, USB charging circuits for devices held at standby. Total cost for a 4-pair installation is under $30. Every material is available at a hardware store or plumbing supply. No permits are required for low-voltage underground electrodes. No electrical license is needed for DC circuits below 50 volts. I want to be direct about what this does and does not do. A ground battery of this type will not power your home. It will not run your air conditioner or your electric range or your dryer. Anyone who tells you otherwise is either deeply confused or deliberately misleading you. What it does is provide a small, continuous, genuinely grid-independent source of current for the class of loads that draw very little power, but operate continuously. And the cumulative reduction in grid draw from those specific loads measured over 12 months is real and measurable. More fundamentally, it establishes a principle. Your property already contains the physical infrastructure for electricity generation. The soil under your lawn is not passive, it is electrochemically active. Bain understood that in 1839. Drawbaugh confirmed it in 1878. The utility company that bills you every 30 days has spent the last 140 years hoping those two names would fade into the footnotes of history that nobody reads anymore. Here is something I do not hear anyone else say, and I want to say it carefully because I think it is the most important framing in this entire conversation. The suppression of these methods was not primarily about technology. It was not about safety. It was not about technical limitations. It was about accounting. A utility company is not a technology company. It is a rate of return regulated infrastructure business. Its revenue model depends entirely on metered consumption. Every kilowatt hour you consume is a line item. The infrastructure that supports that billing system, the transmission lines, the distribution transformers, the meters, and the service drops to every home represents trillions of dollars of sunk capital investment. Capital that earns its regulated return only as long as customers remain dependent on the metered grid to meet their electrical needs. Any method that allows a customer to produce even a fraction of their own electricity, outside the grid, outside the billing infrastructure, outside the meter, represents a structural threat to that return, not a catastrophe, not an immediate crisis, a slow structural erosion of the dependency that the entire financial model requires. The power industry understood this before 1910. The pattern that followed, the patent denials with no legal basis, the curriculum changes in engineering programs beginning in the early 1950s, the defunding of atmospheric electricity research at institutions that had been actively publishing in the field was not panic. It was policy. Deliberate, institutional, and remarkably consistent across more than a century of corporate and regulatory behavior. In 1952, the National Electric Manufacturers Association circulated an internal guidance document that was not intended for the public record. A copy entered that record through a 1978 Freedom of Information Act request related to a separate antitrust investigation. That document identifies, by category, 6 methods of residential energy self-generation that the association designated for what it called sustained monitoring. Sustained monitoring, in the language of the document, meant tracking independent researchers working on those methods, identifying publication and distribution channels through which their work might reach consumer audiences, and where possible working through established academic and patent review relationships to reduce public visibility. Sustained monitoring, written down, formalized, in 1952, with a category list attached. Ground-coupled electrical extraction was on that list. Atmospheric energy receivers were on that list. Resonant transmission circuits operating on Tesla's documented principles were on that list. I am not drawing a conclusion from that document. I am reading you what it says. In 2017, I sat across from a retired utility engineer in a diner outside Pittsburgh. He had spent 31 years at a major regional electric company. He asked me not to use his name. I have kept that. He reached into his jacket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table between us. It was a printed internal memo. Undated, but the formatting and internal reference codes were consistent with documents from the late 1990s that I had seen in other contexts. At the top of the page, in plain block letters, were the words Suppression Index Quarterly Review. Below the heading was a list of technologies with status fields next to each entry. I saw the entries myself. Magnetic induction circuits, ground-coupled DC extraction, atmospheric harvesting methods, resonant frequency transmission systems. The status fields read things like academic only, commercial monitoring, and contained. He told me the memo was distributed quarterly within a small internal department at the company. A department with no public-facing name and no description in any organizational chart he had ever seen. He said he had been assigned to that department for 4 years of his career. He said the purpose was not to develop those technologies or evaluate their commercial potential. It was to know who was developing them externally, and to be in a position to respond if development reached what the memo described as public visibility threshold. And I drove back from that meeting and sat in my driveway for a long time. Not because I was surprised by the information. I'd been in this research for 6 years by then, and very little surprised me anymore. I sat there because of how ordinary he was about it. No confession energy, no guilt, no particular interest in whether I believed him. Just a man who had done a job and was now retired, and did not especially mind if someone finally knew what the job had actually involved. That is the most accurate picture I have of what the suppression looked like from the operational side. Not a shadowy conspiracy. An institution with consistent incentives and employees who did not ask questions that were not on the agenda. Here is what I need you to take away from this video before you close it. The grid is not failing. It is performing exactly as it was designed to perform. The rate increases are not a malfunction of the system. They are a feature of a system that was built from its very first design decision in 1882 to ensure that your dependency on it would be permanent and growing. The question is not whether the grid will reform itself from within. It will not. The incentive structure makes that impossible. The question is what you are going to do on your end. You now know more about the architecture of electrical dependency than the vast majority of the people receiving a utility bill this month. The two methods I showed you tonight, the Steinmetz reactive power compensation circuit from his 1903 patent and the Bain-Drawbaugh ground battery system from the 1878 and pre-1878 public record, are both buildable, both inexpensive, and both over 100 years old. They have been sitting in public documents for longer than most of the infrastructure billing you every month has existed. If this is the first video you have seen on this channel, make sure you subscribe. I release one suppressed method every week. Most of them cost under $20 to implement, and most of the people who could benefit from them never find them unless someone puts a direct link in front of them. The next video goes deeper into the Tesla wireless transmission method, the actual Colorado Springs experiment from 1899, rebuilt step by step in a modern garage setting for under $20. If you want to understand not just how to reduce your bill at the margin, but how the original alternative to the grid actually functioned and why it was stopped specifically because it worked, Hakim, that is the one to watch after this. The link is on your screen right now. I am Dr. Elena Ward. I have spent 8 years on this research. I cannot prove every connection I have shown you tonight. What I can prove is that the pattern exists, and patterns that run in a single direction for over a century do not lie. Thank you for being here.